All right, gang, I know we got a lot to get to, so I'll call the school committee meeting of March 12th, 2025 to order. Superintendent Ray, would you call the roll, please?
Michelle.
Here.
Lisa.
Here.
Marie.
Here.
Randy.
Here.
Marty.
Here.
John.
Here.
Megan.
Here.
Chad. Here. Jeremy's present.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Michelle. Flag that because we'll be presenting on the side. Thank you. We'll do both sides, but it's right in the way for Chad and I. That's perfect.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, that takes me to, we don't have any adjustments to the agenda, so it takes me to item E, approval of last meeting's minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Marie. Any discussion? All those in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, that takes me to the consent agenda. I'll read through the names and then take a motion if that's okay. Yeah, we're lit up here.
Right in the eyes.
So under appointments, we have Marissa Wilson, BIS Ed Tech 2, Dan Geyer, bus driver, Maria Gagnon, BPS Ed Tech 1, Stephanie Gabriner, Credit Recovery Health Stipend, Karen Burnett, BHS Ed Tech 3, and then as a group, BHS Athletic Stipends. Under resignation, we have Amy Bates, Emily Kahn, and Vicki Pinnell.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Marie. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Oh,
Oh, excuse me, Marie. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead.
I was just looking for an explanation for people at home as to what a credit recovery health stipend would be and would entail.
Here. So credit recovery stipend would be for doing that credit recovery class.
Or teaching it.
You could have credit recovery for health. I have to look at that one just a little bit. I can't pull both up and I can't click into it at the same time. I had my
Do we have any numbers on that? Like numbers for kids seeking credit recovery?
I don't have, we do have numbers. I can get that.
Okay.
I can have Martha get that to you.
Pleasure of the committee. Do you want to move ahead, or do you want to hold that one out while we proceed, or what's the thinking? So good to proceed, but just let's get the information.
Yep.
Okay. Any other further thoughts or discussion? Okay. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Okay. Excellent. Good question, Marie. Then that takes us to the superintendent's report.
All right, good afternoon. So you guys have probably all been watching the news about cuts to the Department of Education at the federal level. This is what we know of today, of early reporting. But the information we got today is that nearly half of the U.S. Department of Education has been cut through buyouts and layoffs. That's approximately 2,000 people. The Federal Student Aid Office and Office of Civil Rights were the most severely affected with those cuts. The Education Secretary stated that congressionally appropriated money, including financial aid, won't be impacted because that's an act of Congress. Federal student loans and financial aids will continue as long as Congress maintains those programs. So it would have to be a financial or Congress cut. Special education and 504 accommodations remain legally protected, though complaint process should be expected to be slower because there's less employees to process them. They suggested that moving disabilities rights enforcement could go to Health and Human Services. And then it said most functions of the department will continue with less staff until a law is passed. by Congress. Congress is the only one that can officially get rid of a department. And then it said that staff reductions in the Federal Student Aid Office could create operational challenges for FAFSA and other student loan applications. So that's kind of the word that we got on that this afternoon of where things stand. And other things that are a little bit better than that information is that pre-K and K registrations are out. So if you have a child that is attending next year, we ask you to reach out and assure that screening, paperwork, tours if you need them are done, and more information will come out this spring. Marching band program will host a home show on Sunday the 16th, starting at 1 p.m. in Tiger Gym. There will be 11 other bands competing in that process. The Drama Club has their presentation of Mamma Mia on Thursday, March 20th at 7, the 21st at 7, and Saturday, the 22nd at 2 and 7 at the Performing Arts Center. Parenting in the Brain, the Biddeford School Department are hosting an educational webinar for parents, caregivers, education for anyone who works with children, titled Parenting in the Brain, on Tuesday, March 25th at 6 p.m. Via Zoom. And there's a registration link on our Facebook page. Thank you.
Questions for Jeremy? Interesting times, Jeremy. Is there any immediate impact that you feel or know of?
I think the impact, Marty, is just the day-to-day kind of not knowing. If we lost federal funds, we're in a whole different ball game here. That's the real impact, and people being unsure of what's going to happen. That's something that we have to watch. Just the continued questions of what you're going to do, those come up every single day. Impact on, out of all of those things that probably are out there, I would say the FAFSA information would be the most crucial for us, because families rely on that piece. That's the everyone needs to fill that out if they're going to school. That would be the big one. That really could delay things.
The guidance might be complete the FAFSA right away if you can.
If you haven't, I would, yeah, I mean, that's huge.
Okay. Great. Anything further in superintendent's report? Okay. Committee reports. Anything from Finance and Buildings and Grounds?
Yep, Finance Committee met last week. We are working through the budget right now. Jeremy is going to be presenting that today to the council tonight. He'll be presenting to the City Council next Tuesday, and then we have a joint meeting with the City Council on Monday, March 31st. So a lot of stuff to discuss over the next few weeks, but that's it.
Good. Thanks, Randy. Thanks for your work. Thanks to the entire committee. Lots to dig into. Michelle, on the Policy Committee.
No updates. We haven't had a new policy committee meeting. However, I did just want to note that the amended changes that we discussed on the CBIR last time at the 226 meeting have been made in this second reading. So those are there.
So what we worked on last meeting, or I guess 2 meetings ago, you dug into and updated here. Good. Nice job. Very good. And we do have, and I think I do need a motion for this. We'll,
Read it on motion.
okay, so we have in the Policy Committee that Chad Bars will swap places with Marie. So Chad would be on Policy and Marie would be on Curriculum.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank each of you and those committees, all the work that you're doing. And I appreciate that suggestion, and I think that's going to make us even stronger, so it's much appreciated. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe there's anything from instructional or negotiations and personnel. Am I wrong? Curriculum? Is there anything from instructional or curriculum or negotiations of personnel?
You can.
Okay.
I didn't prepare anything. No, I'm not. The instructional committee did meet today. We talked about just the inter-reading program and some of the different curriculums that we're looking at, trying to make can't say the word today, intro to reading, thank you. Trying to look at that from K through 5, and then we're also going to be looking at grades 6 through 12. They're going to be working on that as well so that we can align all of our curriculums for reading. We also started looking at some of the MTSS right at the very end, and I cannot remember what that stands for, but we're starting to look at, Megan presented for the elementary grades. We're also going to be looking at BMS next time around, and this is why I asked you, because I cannot remember what we just did. Thank you. You know what the acronyms are, I do not. So we're looking at the multi-tiered support, and just starting to discuss also how we look at NWEAs versus also other things that students are learning and how we can make sure our curriculum is helping them with everything that they need to know. I don't know if there's anything else.
I think math and,
Love it.
I think math and focus too, we talked about.
Good, thank you. Thank you for the good work of the committee. Okay, very good. If there's nothing further on committees, I'll go to item E, which is the appointment of this ad hoc committee. I'm reliably told that that's something that I can do, but just to be on the safe side, I would take a motion
So moved.
for. Okay. It's been moved that we form an ad hoc committee for promotion and celebration, which is for around the 8th grade. A second on that, anybody?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Marie, and any discussion? Megan?
Is that the primary focus of this committee, is the 8th grade promotion, or are you talking about promotions and celebrations throughout the district? I
So
just
my-
want to get an idea of what I'm signing on for.
Wow.
I'm excited about it, don't get me wrong. What am I doing?
I think you certainly should also talk about 7th grade.
Yep.
Because I think that once students are here, that creates one thing, and there's an avenue of things. But you also, I think part of it was like leaving the building at the middle school historically has been part of it as well. Many people who have 8th grade in their high school have done several different things all over the state. I think we need to decide what's the best for us.
So but it's around the transition from middle school to high
Yeah.
school is what you're
That's what
doing
I'm
this for.
looking
We're not in charge of like staff's birthdays, your birthday.
Well, you
you
can
know,
be in charge of
your
mine,
yearly
but-
anniversary.
Yeah.
Like that's not,
No.
okay, I was just making sure.
But I think that's the area that we need to hit on, because I think that you'll have people have feelings on either side of the situation, and figure out what's best for us.
And that's going to be comprised of 3 board members and the 2 building principals.
Yeah, and I would, as kind of, I want to say, the compromising the committee as far as making a recommendation, I think they should solicit input from staff and/or parents who would want to be part of that piece. And there's been a lot of data that's already been put out and surveys done and things. Review those pieces, make a recommendation to the board, and move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate your willingness to serve. I really wanted to get this together. I think it's really important. I know that a lot of us have heard this feedback from parents, and some on the proposed committee are parents. Lisa?
Yeah, I think there is a committee with parents. I know Rebecca's part of it. I don't know what it's called. Pi. And I think they've already talked about a lot of that stuff.
I think this committee looked at the parents, who's going to alleviate some of the misinformation that we're getting.
Yeah, but, yeah, okay, all right.
My understanding is that the communication that's gone out to parents is that the board already decided on this years ago, and it was decided that 8th grade promotion was canceled. And so being here when that happened, I don't remember that we voted on that. So that's why I think it's important for us to like get together, have a discussion and make a decision, and then get that communication out to the public. And I agree with like getting input from teachers and parents and community stakeholders, because that's where a lot of the feedback, because that feedback hasn't gone away in the 2 years since we've had an 8th grade promotion. Like, that energy's there. So I'd like to make sure we include that in our decision-making. So it wouldn't be just the 5 of us, I think, making that decision.
I agree. I think that's well said. Anything further? Okay, all those in favor? I think we got a, did you second it? Somebody seconded it.
I did.
Yeah, Marie's third. So, okay, all those in favor? All right, anyone opposed? All right. Thank you, committee. Thanks for stepping up to do that work. I think it's going to be super important, and having a variety of perspectives. As Jeremy said, Martha and Scott might bring other staff, working with parents in this PI committee. I think that will be great. Certainly, it's feedback that I've heard myself, most recently at the K-12 Art Show, and it's just interesting, you know, to think about what we could do, and to honor these kids that are making this big transition. So we'll look forward to that. Don't have any old business. That takes us to new business under item A. We have paid family medical leave private carrier approval. We need a motion on this one, I think.
So I'll make a motion that we jointly contract with the city for private insurance for the PFML insurance.
Second?
Now for discussion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we jointly contract with the city for private insurance for the PFML. Any discussion or comments from the public? Randy, and then John.
How's the city feel about that?
I was going to say this, thanks for asking that. Jeremy is to be commended for identifying this program. The savings to the city are significant, I think in the $75,000 a year range. So it's really a big and positive step. It does two things. It saves all that money, and it actually means that we start paying in later. So we do have a matching motion on the agenda for the March 18th council meeting, and I expect it will find support because it looks like a much better option.
Great.
John?
And I just wanted to commend superintendent for bringing this forward and doing the legwork to get this done and coordinating with the city to make this all happen. So thank you.
You're welcome. The combined savings for taxpayers and employees from city and school will be $561,000 over the period of time, split equally.
Nice job. And you're working with Packen and Carroll, is that right?
Yes, we are working with Paquin and Carroll, who represents the city and the school for insurance matters.
Nice local company. Okay, anything further, thoughts or discussion? All right, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Again, nice job, Jeremy. And yeah, don't go far, Jeremy, because you have the floor now for this, so we'll let you run this how you want to run it. It is not yet. So take it away, Jeremy.
Yeah, so I'd like to just jump down to item C before we go to B, because that's kind of more supporting to the budget process. I probably should have listed them in a different order. But I just wanted to, because we'll be talking about this during the budget presentation and costs, I had shared with you guys, with the Finance Committee, the letter that we received from the MEA Benefits Trust, which is who handles our health insurance. And what's really important about this is that typically school health insurance increase costs have been anywhere from 0 to 10%. You put 10% in your budget, you're in really good shape. And we've had a really good experience rating this year, so I was very, very hopeful that we would be on that lower end of health insurance increase based off historical knowledge. But when you look at this letter, and it talks about the entire trust increase of 17.89%, you start to get a little bit worried. And then as you kind of go down a little bit more, they talk about how they've been able to buy it down over time with proceeds that are left. And last year they applied $28 million to reduce the overall increase, which then had a had quite a range last year of upwards to 12%. And that's not available this year. So I worry that the 17.89%, while that may not be our number, we're certainly operating off the insurance cost statewide of that. And so when we think about 10% in the budget of an increase for health insurance, we're talking about $529,000, I believe it is, of that 10 is what that 10% is. So 1% equals $52,000, and when we are hoping that you're getting a day of 4%, and we're able to take $250,000 off the budget, I think the ability to do that is in jeopardy now, based off that letter. So just when you think about health insurance and we think about coming into the end of March is typically when we'll get an email that will say, hey, the band this year will be between X% and X%, and then you kind of turn to your experience rating and say, okay, I'm hoping that I'm on this end of it versus the other. Just a little worried about that announcement, because 10% was always enough to carry us, and we could come back and have a different case situation. So as we go into the budget piece,
Yeah, go ahead, John, on the
So,
health insurance
the letter
letter.
sort of bugs me a little bit, and it's just the $28 million that they came up with to buy down the insurance. That $28 million came from all the schools that paid into it.
Mm-hmm.
So, did we all pay in equally to that $28 million, or was it, we paid in 10% and somebody else paid in 5%? Because that $28 million should have been split maybe differently than just equally across the whole board.
Yeah.
And, how come they overcharged us that much money for all these years? That's the second question. So we budgetarily inflated the dollar amount so that they could put $28 million. And how much more is in that kitty that they have?
I don't have the answers to those, John.
Now, that would be the kind of couple of questions I'd like to know the answer to.
What I can tell you
To make
is
sure
that,
it was fairly equitable distributed.
and I don't know the distribution on that. What I can tell you, John, is that if you're a school department that's under 50 employees, you tend to get a community rate. So in Dayton, we fall in that community rate, and every year it's been like 4%.
Even if your mod rate's high?
Yep, because
Right. That's not
you're
right.
under 50 employees. And then, because you have individual increases each year, while you have the same insurance, we have a different cost for that insurance here than we have in Dayton and we have in Saco for the same plan. So that's kind of another interesting factor, is there's a difference between all of them of what the monthly payment is.
Because I know the state of Maine, if you're an insurance company, you can't, everybody's got to charge pretty much the same rate if you're buying insurance on the market for health insurance. And they're not allowed to give you like free tickets to
Right.
the Celtics game or any of that stuff. It's not like some of the other stuff that you can do those things for. So this rate should be pretty compatible, and we're not allowed to go out and shop this to see if we're really paying a fair and equitable rate right now, correct? Because it has to be through.
Through the trust.
Yeah. I'd like to, does anybody audit the trust, and can we get a copy of the audit?
Don't know that. I'll have to ask that question.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Back to you, Jeremy.
So as we head into the budget piece, we have talked about this information a lot. We have used the same setup on slideshow for about the last 10 years. So when someone says, hey, I don't recognize something, I can go back, no, it looks exactly the same, typically in the same order. Kind of do that on purpose so that people get used to seeing something, and we move forward. And, at the end of the day, the first part is that you guys have a commitment to students as a board. And you have 3 pillars that you stand on, that are outlined in our plan, through our policies, that we create environments where learning feels more like discovery. Will not ignore or make excuses for the impact of what happens outside of school. And all learners best supported by a positive culture and climate. And so those are the things that kind of guide us as we look at, what's in the best interest of what we have in our budget and how we try to move forward. But then there's all those other factors that we talk about all the time. And we talk about how valuation has impacted things so significantly for Biddeford. And we've talked about how this year we had a 16% valuation increase compared to the rest of the state at 12.59. And we know that when we look ahead next year, that we're still going to have almost another $500 million increase in city valuation. The good news is that's going to be under the state average of increase, which is, you take on $500 million and you're still under. That just means that a lot of the rural communities are catching up because of staffing and those other pieces. We know that the funding formula is not going to change drastically. If the two bills that we've worked on for homeless and economically disadvantaged get approved, that's going to help us a lot. And those will be going to workshop in the coming months. They were going to be in workshop while I was gone last week. We were able to work with the ed chair to move those so that we could go in and talk about the impacts. And then just when we talk about valuation and you're out in the community, you'll tend to hear you'll hear the word TIF get thrown around, which is tax increment financing on the city side, where basically they design a district, they say this is a TIF district, and they shelter that valuation. And I don't know, Marty or John can probably answer the question of how many TIFs there are in town, but there's several of them. And I was working with the city today about what happens if you extend a TIF or if you don't have a TIF. And we looked at what would happen if, $75 million was added to our valuation. How would that impact the school department? Well, if $75 million was added today, meaning that our number was $75 million higher, we would receive $460,000 less subsidy. And if that was $125 million, now you're up to, $750. And so understanding that valuation piece and what the impacts are is important to us. And it's also important to realize, as we've talked about, Lisa, is the value just the house that you've lived in for 20 years that has gone up and you have no desires to move? Or is this because there's new houses or new developments around you that are, new tax value? Those are two very different things. And certainly a very different feeling from someone who's lived in a house for 20 years that doesn't want to move versus a new house that comes on and you're expecting to pay that new tax. Then we have been through the ED 279, and we've talked about where there are positive things, where there are negative things, how our student counts are up, the disadvantage rates increasing, our weighted counts for ELL, knowing that we have almost 100 more students. And we've talked about the fact that after we went through that last meeting, and I'll go through all of this again for the council, but you guys have sat here and seen some of this before, is that the state share of education in Biddeford for this year is 37%, which, again, when you look around to some of the surrounding communities here, just being a superintendent, the other two that are like 50% receivers, that's a big difference for us. Or if we look at other communities across the state, and I was talking with a reporter yesterday about the funding formula, and they were asking my thoughts on it, and I said what's hard is that you've had the same funding formula that's generally worked for 20 years, but as a state we look different, and certainly valuation looks different, and we know that the student population in the state has decreased almost by 20% in 20 years, and yet we still all have these challenges. But we also need to look at components of the funding formula that are based on you get money for how much you spend. And we've always been very conservative here and trying to keep taxes low, but when you look at a student in an affluent southern Maine town who spends more money on special education, and they're receiving $4,500 a student back based off their expenditures, where we're getting $2,800 a student. The fact that you're in a different zip code and you're spending more money shouldn't impact the amount of subsidy that you're getting back. That is, you know, kind of the rich getting richer in that scenario. And then we've also looked at where we rank based off expenditures in 2024, that we report to the DOE about where we rank about spending money in compared to our neighboring communities. And we know that we spend one of the lowest amounts. One of the big pieces you guys have here that's not included in this number is, one, the vocational center, but we know that most of that just comes directly in state aid, and not every school has one of those, so it's not you're not raising the money locally in taxes. But you also do have you voted for a large school bond for the high school. And, you know, we're on like year 13 of, I think, 25 years or so. We're, you know, over like halfway through that piece, which will definitely change things in the future. But when you look at in the classroom type things, that's where we stack up. And then we can look at demographics over time. And when we look at the student demographics over time, I mean, we can see that since 2017, 2018, we basically have the same number of students. We had some dips, and a lot of those were COVID-related dips. People kept their kids out of school, and they didn't return immediately. Looks like I missed a typo in there, but we know that the number of students for economically disadvantaged is 64%. We know that our CTE center, if you can look over time from 2018, 2019, we're almost educating 200 more kids in our vocational center than we were those years, which is great programming news for us. Special ed counts tend to be over 20%, which is high. And then if you look at the number of ELL students, we're at 16.89%. We're a very different population and demographic than many of the schools in the surrounding area. When we look at this current budget and we look at the cost drivers of the expense budget, and we're talking expense, that's just what we spent last year to what we spent this year. Currently, we're up about $2.5 million. And where does that come from? That comes from salary and benefits. It comes from health insurance. It's an updated math and reading curriculum that's in the budget. Payroll taxes, you can see we're $148,000. You just made a motion so that we can help with that one, which will be helpful for the budget. Additional staff for EL, out of district placements. You easily can get up to $2.5 million. There's also some things on the reduction of the closing of JFK that will save us some money, and we're still working on a lot of others, from still working with Honeywell, still working with Snowplow, still reaching out to insurance carriers about what that's going to look like. Are you going to need elevator licenses, X, Y, and Z throughout that process? And so as you come to those pieces, that's what makes up the $2.5 million. Then we have a lot of shared services that brings in some revenue for us. And, you know, when we think about all of those pieces, you've got about $600,000 wrapped up in revenue for shared services. That's the work we do with Dayton, that's the work we do with Saco, this is the software, it's all of those things that come in that helps lower that mill rate. And John, you always use the, is it 4.5 cents per $100,000? So when we think of all of these ups and downs, that's a good piece to think in your mind, is that every $100,000 that we spend is 4.5 cents on your mill rate, and any 4.5 cents that we bring in, any 100,000 that we bring in revenue decreases that mill rate by 4.5 cents. I also felt like this next slide, which is an 11-year budget comparison of where we've been over time. Because one of the really, really unique factors about this year's budget is that because of the loss in state subsidy from valuation growth, you really see a very different picture of what we're looking at. And so historically over time, you can see that our expenditures in the increase of those, we had some great years, but they hovered under 3% there for a while. The last several years have been higher because of wages. And actually, the amount of money that I have today in this budget, and then you can minus 148,000, so we're going to be at about 2.4 million, is less than the amount of money that we asked for last year in an increase. And it's going to be less than what we asked for an increase in FY24. The problem is that you have a tax rate situation because of the reduced subsidy that you're looking at 11.5% to the taxpayer when expenditures are going to be under the 5% mark. That's very much a flip-flop for what a lot of districts are experiencing. And, you know, I could go down the list of text messages from all the superintendents in the area that are like, yeah, our increase to taxpayers is 5%, but our expenditures are 8%, 9% up. Us and Sanford are kind of sitting on the back side of these, where it's that weird reversal. And so I think this has to be historically, obviously, when I look at what we as a committee and community have done tax-wise, should be pretty proud of the past. It's, you know, as John came in today, this is something we've talked about. And we can go back to every single one of those slides over the last and say, hey, we kept pointing to where the valuation's coming from, and it's coming, and it's here. And so those are the issues that we face. And as I said last time, and we talked about it in Finance Committee, this isn't a supplies cut issue. This is about the integrity of your school department and what you want. And, you know, that's why I think it's important for us to put this information out to City Council this way and have them clearly understand the mathematical piece that we're looking at. And then when we come together with the City Council on the 31st to talk about what's the type of guidance that we need to have to say, you know, like in the past years we talked about it, someone says, Jeremy, what would X amount of reduction look like? And what would be the pathway to that? And what is this type of reduction? We're going to have to talk about some of those things until we get to a point of, you know, whether we're comfortable. And there may be people that say, hey, stop right where you're at, you know, and don't do anything. But there's an impact to that. There's also an impact to the fact that we know as a school department, our budget gets approved by the citizens. And that's something that we need to convey to people, what's happening and what the impact will be on their mill rate. And so, you know, while it's one of the more challenging budgets, it's also one of the more interesting budgets to say, hey, this is where we're at and this is what we would need to do. And as us and the City Council would need to come together about what we feel is a comfort level that the community can handle, knowing that we need to balance their needs well, because roads still need to be paid. You know, you want your trash picked up, you need to have police officers, et cetera, and figure out how we make this all work together. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about this budget or about where we're at today. I would put that over to the committee.
Questions or thoughts for Jeremy on the budget? You're just a ray of sunshine, Jeremy.
Yeah, that's a real positive one. I like those years when it was 0. Those were good ones.
I'm looking back at those
Those were good ones, Lisa.
nostalgically. John?
So, I got a little note here on my computer, so it's been here for a year. We talked about the budget last year. And one of the things was, then it was a 10-year comparison, is what you had last year, and now we've got 11. And I asked if we could put the cities right next to it. I don't know if anybody remembers me asking that question. So it would be nice to actually put the city side next to this, come up with another slide, whether you can work for Brian or somebody, just so we can see how it compares. I mean, because the city budget, and the taxpayers, it's a whole budget. It's not just, the city and the school. It's, separate. It's both combined, but they get a say on the school side, but have no say on the city side whatsoever. So it'd be nice just to show everybody a comparison of how it is, whether it's higher or lower or the same. But I had, it's the same note I had last year, so I still would like to try to get that if we could this year.
John, I'm assuming to make that a full picture of taxes, you would include the county as well?
Oh, yeah. 3 different pots. In the county, we have no say over neither. They just tell us what we're gonna pay. I remember one year we threatened not to pay them right away, and we had to run it down the same day, otherwise the fines were gonna be too heavy. But we waited till the last possible minute. And I actually did something I never do. I actually paid my taxes early, because I knew the city needed some finances, so I paid early. And I know my good friend, Mr. Peaker, is probably rolling in his grave, because we used to always go on that last day they were due. We'd show up at City Hall together and pay our taxes. That's how we always did it, so. But if you could get that comparison, I would greatly appreciate it.
Other thoughts or comments? I'll jump in with one. On slide 3, if you look at our valuation trends versus the state, obviously one of the things that kind of stung us, as you mentioned repeatedly, is that we've grown more quickly here, which in its way, of course, is good news. We have people moving here and businesses growing and so forth. Does look like, and also we had conducted a revaluation, maybe more promptly than some other communities had. I'll get to the point. Speaking to the council president, we talked about convening a group, another ad hoc committee that might be across the school committee and the council. I'm looking to my left. We were going to ask Mr. McCurry to be on it with the economic development director. We were thinking about the TIFs and maybe a suitable person from the council. This won't help us right away, but I think if we can look a little further ahead when we add to this more lines to the bottom of this chart on page 3, 2028 and 2029, where we can see if we can get ourselves on the right side of that. Because you're absolutely right. We're seeing great growth in the community, which is wonderful. If we're focused on the Biddeford Crossing area, which is, Target, Market Basket around there, Andrews Road, I think we're going to see a lot of growth. There's a lot of opportunity out there by the exit. But we got to think about tipping that to protect that value from the clause of the state. And then the same deal with Main Street. Things, believe it or not, shovels will be going in the ground on either side of the parking garage, and then outer Main Street as well, over actually towards the school here. I think this will be a very significant valuation growth area as well. So it would be the same sort of strategic thinking around there. So it would certainly take volunteers or any further thinking about how to make the most of that. But that's one way that we can look 2 or 3 years out and try to get on the right side of this funding conundrum.
I'll do that.
Thank you. Jeremy, I know you're going to present this to the council together with the acting city manager on the city side next week on the 18th. By the way, school committee members are welcome and encouraged to come. You might get questions from counselors, or they might want to have back and forth. Of course, we're going to have a fuller chance to do that on the 31st, but you're certainly welcome. It is at the beginning of the agenda on next Tuesday. So you're certainly welcome. Anything else you want to highlight, Jeremy, that's strategic, or anything you want to make sure people know?
I just think that when those 2 bills get to work session, and I'm certainly to help anyone write the testimony or send that in, but reaching out directly to members of the Education Committee is really important. the education committee, excuse me, has a lot of members that are from southern Maine or from areas where there's a great deal of impact. And so I would encourage that piece. And I would also, encourage you guys to take the same step too, is that a lot of times when you get to legislature, they talk about, well, this costs X amount of money. We don't have the money. Well, we also maybe need to have side by side a group that studies some other things, because we always can't just ask for more and more and more without looking at our overall operations as a state and say, well, what on the education side might need some refining? I think that's a piece, because in 19 years, we are 20% less students in the state of Maine. That's a big amount. And so that has to be part of the consideration, not so much from a local piece, but, what's going on? And then there's, when you think about school construction statewide, there's several bills right now around school construction where they're looking at a 3%, I believe it's this week or next week it goes, that there's a recommended additional 3% lodging tax to fund school construction. And people would say, okay, well, that's an interesting way to do it. Lodging, could that impact tourism? And yes, there's all of those pieces, but we pay everything for school construction in the state of Maine based on bond payments and debt, that by the time you have $100 million project, you're really paying $170 million for it. If we could get into a cash-based model, you're almost getting twice as much. And while I think we're pretty fortunate here, just look at some other schools in the area or in rural Maine, and they're rough. I mean, school you work in is they're rough.
Yeah.
I
I just have a comment, and so I know I tease you a lot about the budget and you boring me and making me very depressed with it, but I do want to just thank you for how well you explain a really complicated system to somebody who has no mathematical brain at all. Like, I feel like I get it. And I also think that you've brought us down to complete bare bones. And so when you look at like this almost 12% tax increase, and I think back to your first slide as you brought up the budget, and like the fact that like some of the things that had to get cut, and one of those was an ed tech position and one of those was a teaching position. And I was sitting in curriculum today thinking about how much work needs to get done to really get these curriculums on the ground, and ed techs are doing that work, and teachers are needed, and thinking like we're cutting, really vital positions, and we're still at this ask. And so I just don't think people understand, even at this ask, like what we've already cut and how much we really, like there's not a single spare. In fact, I'm nervous about what you are cutting. Like, I don't love that you have that on the chopping block. I don't want you to have that on the chopping block. But, so anyway, I appreciate all the work that you've done for this, and it's too bad this number doesn't show, like, what it should, but it's unfortunate. That's all. It's my comment. I'm giving you kudos.
Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. That perspective is really helpful. Marie?
I also want to just say I want to thank you for the work you're doing at the state level. I know it's not going to impact this year, but hopefully that formula can have some change come to it that is more equitable, and not just looking at a valuation piece that kind of throws everything in a tizzy, because I think the economic status, the disadvantaged, and our homeless rate would be beneficial to this community, and others, and many others. And so I know that's a lot of extra work. I think people have been talking about this formula for a very long time. So I appreciate the work that you're doing to bring some change to that as well.
Thank you, guys. One of the pieces is that when we go through the budget piece, as school committees or elected officials, you in some ways become ambassadors of the message around town. And if there was one slide I could ask you to print out or get a copy of would be the cost per student slide. Because I'm also, like, I'm not a spendthrift either. I you know. Yeah, that's, or take a picture of it. But I'm a fairly
9, yeah.
conservative financial person by nature. But even if you said we're spending the state average, which, again, we should have more efficiencies than other people in the state because of size, location, we'd be spending an extra $4 million. That's a lot. That's a lot of staff, that's a lot of programs, that's a lot of things that you could do. And so I think that is one of the more important pieces to come out of this. And even if you said, hey, to spend the state average, you don't have debt service in there because we voted for a $2 million payment, even $2 million more buys us a whole lot of staff and programming. And so, you know, I look at some of the others at the top, the $10 or $11 million more, and I say to myself, what would that be like? So I think that's one to at least think about.
Yeah, noted, thank you. We do a lot with a little. And if you wanted to give a shorthand, Jeremy, just to kind of wrap up, I think on slide 5, this is where we're really asking the Education Committee to take a look. So I think sort of in the middle right there where the EPS weights with that 0.15 number. So it's kind of our argument that that's too low to truly recognize the extra resources and efforts that we put into educating the disadvantaged students. We do wonderful, wonderful things for them, but it's, you know, costs something to do. And then I think the homeless bill that you have in at the top there would provide basically an additional weighting for the student counts. Is that correct? So we'd basically see that number would be increased by actually 50% as our proposal for those students that are homeless, yeah. So it would bring more resources because we expend more resources. And that would apply across all districts, not just Biddeford. So we think it would be equitable. Obviously, it would have the effect of taking away from districts that don't have as many disadvantaged or homeless students. But given that it expends extra resources to support those students, you know, I think it's fair. So yeah, we'll be pushing hard on that, and that'll be another thing that will give us if we're successful, even in part, a better budget situation in future years. So good. Closing thoughts or comments on the budget presentation? We're all going to get a couple more looks at it, and then we're going to have to make some decisions. And direction from the committee, Jeremy, coming to you, what form is best for you as far as, you know, I'd like to see this changed or modeled, or how would this look, type of thing?
I think again, after we present to the city council and we have a opportunity to come together, getting the chart that John has, looking at both sides of the coin, because there's needs everywhere. That is where hopefully from the council and school committee there can be some unified guidance of what people would like to see. Because I think, you know, one of the things is, let's say that nobody's going to do anything, okay? If our stance is, hey, we're not going to do anything and we're going to put it out as it is, don't send your administrators to come up and say, well, what's it take to go to 0? If you know you're not going to even consider that, because then you're just going to get a whole lot of people stirred up and nervous about things. That's not what we want. I think we need to take a reasonable approach of what would look like and what those would be, and give some direction to both of your administrators on what that approach would be. And then you can argue the benefits of whether it's this or that or the other piece, but you also need to have that number from the city too, and with the valuation piece and new valuation, because maybe something got maybe it's not going to be as bad once you run all of the calculations.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, more to come on that topic. That takes us, committee, into a series of second readings of D, E, and F. We will need motions on each of these.
Yeah.
And so we've already gone over item C, so that takes me to item D, second reading of the 2025-6.
Second?
Moved by John, seconded by Marie. Any discussion? Anyone from the public? Okay, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Okay, and then we have second readings of policies, and I know the committee's made some updates here, so we'll take item E, second reading of policy to review JKB.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Michelle and seconded by John. Any discussion on this one? Okay, all those in favor? That's unanimous. And then, is there objection to taking item F, all four of them together? Okay, and we'll go to item F, second reading on CBI, CBIR, JKD, and JI.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
We got I'll take Marie as making the motion and Michelle seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Good work, Policy Committee. Thank you. Thanks for incorporating the feedback, making those changes, and the good discussion that took place around that. It's much appreciated. That takes me to public participation. Anybody from the public wishing to comment this evening? Please don't be bashful. Doug, we're going to need the microphone, so hang on 1 minute. Mandy, or yeah, it's over here, yeah. You'd start off with your name, and we'd love to hear from you.
My name's Amy, and I'm a parent of 2 within the school district. And the reason why I was coming today was to kind of ask a question which Mr. Ray has kind of already answered. And as a parent of 2 children who utilize the special ed department, I'm very anxious, which I can own, about what might happen down the road as we're making, conversations about budgets and the ever-changing things that are happening on the federal level. And I think communication, I think just the more we know about it, it provides a lesser anxiety, because I want to thank you for the curriculum that you put forward in the special ed department that we have. I have a child who is now almost out of special ed, who's made the honor roll, who's gotten the most improved student at BMS. So it affects these kids. My daughter would not be where she is academically if it wasn't for Principal Dakota and the special ed staff. So as a parent, when I'm watching what's happening on the news, I get nervous. And I'm not the only parent that must feel that way. So I want to thank you for the work you've done and how it helps our students. But just make sure that we have an open dialogue should and if things change. It just allows us to advocate better and find other avenues to help our kids. But that was what I was calling, and then Mr. Ray provided the information today. So that's my thought.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thanks for those comments, and here on our excellent staff and the great work that they do. That's very rewarding to hear, so thank you so much. Anybody else? Okay, to the committee. Comments, thoughts, updates? Anybody? John?
So, I don't know how many got to go to the art show, but I thought it was absolutely fantastic. If you didn't get a chance to go, you missed some good stuff over there. So I would say that. I went to the Winter Awards last night, and that was quite good. It was quite a big turnout. It was good to see all the kids and how great they were. So I thought the slideshow was great at the end, so that was a good thing. Then I had the honor. I think we all got an email from from a second grade teacher about asking us to come read. I got the privilege to go do that the other day. I thought it was a great thing, so if you have the chance, I know they're looking for volunteers to go in and read, so I think that would be great if you could do that. Thanks.
Yeah, it was fun reading with Ms. Palladino.
Yeah.
That was cool. Thank you, John, and thanks for going to those events. Other comments or thoughts? I have two quick things. Together with the Biddeford Fire Department, we are pushing hard to get free smoke and carbon monoxide detectors out there. It's not just that we'll give you a detector. We'll come to your home or apartment and install it, show you how to use it. Members of the fire department, together with members of the Red Cross, will do that on coming up, I believe it's April 12th. If you go to the Biddeford Fire Department Facebook page, you can sign up there, or you can go to redcross.org. And I'd love to, they said their goal was 50. I wanted to push it to 80 homes or apartments that we could get those out there. Very moving story of one of our city councilors recently had a fire at his home, and our excellent FD showed up and saved, the home and lots of things as a result of having these installed. So it's very, very important. And then pleased on Saturday the 29th to convene, this will be the 10th consecutive year that Biddeford has done an event honoring Vietnam veterans. This one's especially important. It's on Saturday, March 29th at 11 a.m. at Veterans Memorial Park, which is the one next to 7-Eleven at Poole and Alfred Streets. We'll have remarks from the Vietnam Veterans of America here locally, and this actually is the 50th year since the end of hostilities in Vietnam, so it's something we especially want to commemorate. So please make a point to join that if you would. All veterans, families, everyone is welcome, including from SACO. And with that, we do have an executive session. We will not be coming back. This is going to be led, I think, largely by Marie, and it's evaluate or evaluations, so to speak. So I would take a motion for that.
Make a motion that we move to executive session for the evaluation of superintendent pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A. Yeah.
Okay, moved and seconded to go into executive session, 1 MRSA 4056A. All those in favor? And anyone opposed? Okay, motion passes. I think we had one opposed?
Right.
No, we're all in favor.
No, I would oppose.
Okay.
You don't want to go in?
No.
Oh, okay.
All right, we'll go into executive session. Thank you for a good meeting, everybody. See you soon.
John,